All right. So I'm so excited to talk to you about sacred medicine. So every book of yours that comes out, I think is my favorite until the next book comes out, and then that's my new favorite. But I think sacred medicine is actually my favorite. So
Thank you.
I think it addresses the question we all have, which is what is the foundation of healing? What is it really all about? Which is sort of that question that when we're on a health journey, we are seeking so desperately. And so I love this book because it helps us answer that question and also come to peace with that it's not easy to answer for anybody, which I think for people listening who are struggling in any way and feeling bad that they haven't figured it all out, this book will make them feel better, I think,
Well,
because it's not easy.
yeah, I hope so. I really, I can't tell you how many times I reread this book, trying to imagine reading it as somebody seriously suffering from a mystery illness who doctors are, throwing their hands up and they're frustrated and they're in pain or whatever, with an empathy lens, because so many of the books that I've read about healing are interesting and maybe inspirational in a way if you're not suffering.
Yeah.
But, if you're actually struggling, I just found that so many people, the feedback that I got from so many people, including my own editor, in the first draft of Sacred Medicine, I started with a miracle story, and she was like, "Don't give me another miracle story. My daughter's sick,
Mm.
not getting better, and that doesn't make me feel better. I want to feel better when I read this book." So I really tried to make it clinically relevant with actual tools that people could try through trial and error and experimentation to see maybe this helps, maybe it doesn't. But hopefully, if nothing else, people feel like we care about each other. We care about the people that are suffering. Like, and we can at least, I really felt this when I was at Lourdes. I have a whole chapter about going to Lourdes, and it was so tender to see thousands of people in like wheelchairs and on crutches,
Mm-hmm.
like people pushing them in their wheelchairs, and like these thousands of people that were all suffering together. But they were like in it together, and nobody was saying, "Oh, well, you're better than this other person because you got your miracle and you didn't." It was just like the suffering of humanity coming together for mass at sunset, like holding each other, and it was incredibly heart opening.
It's so beautiful because I think one of the things that I personally struggled with when I was suffering with, ongoing health issues, and I think most people can relate, is we compare our healing to other people's healing, and we can thank social media for amplifying this problem. But we see that someone else is, feeling better. I mean, I would meet people who like I've been, doing a million treatments, and I meet someone who goes like, oh, I got like a few vitamin B shots and that helps so much. And it's like, well, why am I not the person that vitamin B was the cure for? And we tend to compare. So I love what you're talking about in terms of just everyone maybe is on their own path, but if we can see each other as all struggling in some way or suffering and hold that space, it's so important.
Yeah, it's such I talk a lot about the paradoxes of healing in this book, but it's such a tender thing because it's like bragging about your healing doesn't necessarily make other sick people feel better, but it is also sort of, well, it's helpful sometimes to know that these things are possible.
Yes,
And so
yes.
it's such a paradox for me. It's kind of like I was just posting on Facebook earlier today because we were having some of this conversation. I'm really interested in crowdsourcing these conversations and really hearing from people that are still suffering about what's helping and
Yeah.
what isn't helping. And so much of what's out there in the like wellness world and the mind body world, like it's helping some people and it's harming others. And so I'm really trying to find that balance of what's helpful without hurting people.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that is so true that, and this is something I really learned is just everyone has their own unique path. You can spend all the hours you want on the message boards, but finding your cure on a message board isn't going to be the cure. It has to be your own journey. It really, really does, which is so frustrating, but then also can be freeing that you don't have to follow what everyone else is doing. And it is a keeping up with the Joneses in a way.
Right. Well, I loved your work so much. I mentioned you in Sacred Medicine, and
Thank you. I
I
saw that.
I loved your story so much because it's so honest and it's so it's like miracles and struggle. It's like, shift
Yes.
and transformation and then like backsliding and relapse and all,
Yes.
all of that is much more common than like somebody having a flash of awakening in which they wake up and their cancer is gone and never comes back. That almost
Absolutely.
never happens.
Yep. And I had the worst month I had ever had physically the month before I started to turn a corner. So it's like you never know just how close you are. I was at that point where it was like, nothing is going to get better. If anything could prove nothing is going to get better, it's that month that I was having such a hard time. And it was just a few weeks later that it was like, wait a second, what happened? So it is so interesting how that works. So you've written several books before, and I'm wondering, what in your heart told you needed to write this book? Like, why this book and why now?
Well,
Such a loaded question, I'm sure, right?
yeah, it is because this book originally was part of Mind Over Medicine. So, which was my third book
Wow.
and was published back in 2013. And originally, Mind Over Medicine. So I think of this as the sequel to Mind Over Medicine.
Okay.
Not that people have to read Mind Over Medicine to read this one, but I didn't repeat what's in Mind Over Medicine in this one, and it's absolutely part of the story of how do we make ourselves miracle prone.
Right.
But the original draft of Mind Over Medicine, it's so funny to think back to this. It was part one and part two. And part one was everything that science can prove. And part
Yep.
two was everything in the realm of anecdote, which was more like the subjective aspects of healing that we don't have science for. And it got very unwieldy. And my editorial team was like pulling their hair out. And at some point, my agent was like, Lissa, this is 2 books. And I was like, oh, Lord, this is 2 books. But I
Yes.
realized if this was a separate book, if I was going to do justice to the anecdotes, I wanted to go and actually experience some of the things that the people were telling me about. Like people were telling me, like, I went to Lourdes and my, autoimmune disease went away, like from drinking the healing water and like saying mass. And I'm going, what?
Yeah.
What's happening at Lourdes?
Yeah, of course.
We're like, well, I went to the Amazon and I, was working with this shaman. I didn't touch, by the way, I didn't touch psychedelics in this book because that's a whole other
Yes.
mess of a conversation. And almost everything that I saw in that world was more shadow than good. So I was
Yes.
I
feel the same about that. I feel that's my exact experience.
Not that I think there isn't benefit to psychedelics, but I think anybody, in most places, psychedelics are still illegal, and anybody who's willing to break the law by using an illegal substance doesn't care at all about medical or therapeutic ethics. So there's, it's sort of, I think it's the people that are facilitating psychedelic journeys.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
To break the rules.
Yes. I've also seen too, in my experience with, talking to people, that's one thing that if it goes wrong, it's very hard to undo. There are some things that if you have a bad reaction to something, you can kind of find your way back to the middle. But that's one thing I've seen, that if it goes wrong, it's really, really damaging and very hard to find your footing again.
Absolutely. And I definitely heard anecdotes of people who had miraculous outcomes from psychedelics. And I heard way more people that were re-traumatized by it.
Yes.
So I was like, okay, what are these people talking about? They're going to these Balinese healers. They're working with these indigenous practitioners all over the world. They're going to energy healers or faith healers. And then I started hearing the anecdotes of people that were doing like really hardcore cutting edge trauma therapy. And their illness was going away. And that was like a side effect. That was not at all why, they were going because they were emotionally struggling.
Yeah.
Or dealing with mental illness. But it was like almost a side effect that was like, oh my gosh, my cancer went away and I hadn't gone to the doctor. Like I had said no to conventional medical treatment because I was in hospice. Right. Things like that. And I was like, what? Treating your trauma could cure your cancer? Right. Like what the hell? That was not on my radar.
Yeah. And so was it that curiosity about what's going on in all these places that led you to decide to cut, or did you always plan to do this book when it didn't work with sacred medicine, or did it take a few years and then you went, okay, it's time for this book?
Well, I mean, I'm sort of laughing as you ask that question, because I now, after many years of trauma therapy, I have one answer that's like the answer I would have given you back then. And I
Yeah.
have another answer for like, oh, that's why I actually did it. So the answer I would have told you back then was like, yeah, I was wildly curious
Yeah.
about whether there was anything that was happening in those mysterious realms that we could harness. Like, is there
Yeah.
anything that we can do to be more proactive about making ourselves miracle prone? And is there any self-help element to that? Because I had a whole list of discernment criteria, and I wasn't particularly interested in, telling people, well, here's this guy, he's booked, he's got a 1 year waiting list,
Right.
$300 an hour, and oh yeah, he's curing cancer. That wasn't helpful. Like, that's not really clinically relevant. But I was curious whether that guy could teach anybody what he knows how to do. Like, is he apprenticing people? Is he training other people to do what he's doing? So, I was just wondering, is there, I'm totally fine with saying that there are things in the realm of medicine that depend on an expert, right? Like, my daughter's father cut 2 fingers off his left hand with a table saw, and I don't know any healer that knows how to put fingers back on. Like,
No, nor do I.
12 hours in surgery with a microsurgeon, like putting every nerve and blood vessel and bone back together. Like, great, I'm fine with saying there are experts that we must rely on, but
Yes.
that wasn't what this book was going to be about. I wanted to be like, what can you do yourself that could improve your chances of being one of those stories? And so it was really just my fascination, my curiosity, and I guess maybe some adventure seeking also. That kind of sounded cool and fun.
That does sound cool and fun. And it does seem like, because you really got to explore I think to the benefit of the book was that you explored so many different places and so many different areas and so many different healers and so many different aspects, because usually we have to read a book on each, and your book allows all of that to come into one place so that we can learn without going. I mean, listen, I went to India as part of my journey. Not everybody can go to India. And also, I think there was so much that I got in India that I could have cultivated at home had I known. But the fact is that sometimes travel and being pushed out of our comfort zone is exactly what forces us to see in a new way or do things differently. But I love that you brought that into people's homes in the book.
Well, thank you. That was, I mean, you're addressing two of the things that I came across in my journey of this. One was that in the realm of healing, I realized everything is so fragmented and siloed. And you have like the conventional medical doctors doing their thing in the hospital. And if you want to learn how to do that, you go to medical school. And then you have the, psychologists that are working on mental illness, that are going to graduate school to become therapists, or, going to medical school to become psychiatrists. And then you have sort of the, maybe you have like the anthropologists studying the shamans in the universities, right? The energy healers don't even get a silo in academia. Like, they don't exist. That's all charlatans and quacks in the realm of academia. Maybe you get like the biologists and physicists doing biofield science, in their sort of fringe laboratories. But like, and then you've got like the gurus and the spiritual practitioners, like maybe they go to the divinity school,
Right.
But none of these people are talking to each other. And they're all reporting outcomes of what sounds like miraculous healing.
Right.
And I'm going like, wait a minute, we need to have a multidisciplinary crossover.
So much.
And get everybody out of their silos so that we can, and part of the problem with those silos is that everybody that I met in a silo was like, my thing is the thing, it's the panacea, it works for everybody, it works all the time. And when you ask them, well, tell me about your treatment failures, oh, it's the patient's fault. And I'm going,
right. They don't believe enough, or they're not doing enough. And it's never just sometimes that shit happens we're not in control of everything, and all those realities. I know.
To be honest, doctors are the most humble. Like, doctors are at least willing to say, like, I can't cure all cancer. Like, I try, I'm an oncologist, I do my best. Lots of people die after I treat them. They don't really consider that. I mean, like, those are treatment failures, but they don't have like an egoic need to pretend, oh, it's actually the patient's fault that they didn't my chemo, where
So interesting.
the
So
energy healers are
fascinating.
incredibly arrogant. Like, and I'm not speaking about you.
No, it's okay. And if you were, that was okay, but thank you.
No. It's like, it's amazing when I was working with energy healers and I would say, tell me about your treatment failures. And first of all, they'd get triggered by that question.
Wow.
And they would almost always blame the patient.
Hmm.
So that's a problem. But part of what I wanted to do to bring these silos together was to say, okay, let's put our egos aside. Let's acknowledge that no medicine is a panacea, and
Right.
that every healing journey is probably going to be a multidisciplinary experience. We're going to have to use lots of different tools in the toolbox. We're going to have to trial and error and experiment.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with having a treatment failure. Like, we try one thing, it doesn't work, we try something else.
Yes.
So
I
that's, go ahead.
sorry. I was just gonna, I love that. And it's so, so important. It's one of the reasons that I felt, even as I sometimes feel uncomfortable, I overshare about my own experience because I want people to know, even today, when something happens to me, it's not that easy for me to feel better. I still get stuck in, I have all these tools, and I believe that clearing trauma and stress and calming the nervous system, all of those things help. But all we can do is show up. And sometimes we still don't feel better right away. And sometimes shit just happens. And sometimes, a couple of weeks ago, I had a small surgery to remove skin cancer from my hairline. And I wrote about it. I emailed everybody and I said, this is what's happening. And you know what? I laid out in the sun too much. I'm also doing some energy work because who knows? But I'm just going to get the surgery because that's available. I'm going to do some energy work because that's available. And I'm not going to beat myself up because there's no need for that. And I think it's important for anybody in the field to really model that we aren't in control of everything. Our belief matters, our outlook matters, our perspective matters, limiting stress matters, all these things matter, but we still don't always have the answers. And we're not experts. I don't know about you, but when, like I just said, I'm not an expert at healing myself in 5 minutes if something goes wrong. And sometimes I need a doctor, and it's okay.
Oh, come on, Amy. You manifested that cancer with your dirty thought.
I I know, right? It's
It's
like,
really such a cruel way of thinking. It really is a
yeah,
very cruel way of thinking, especially when we overlay it on somebody else. And
yeah,
I think part of what I really wanted to get across in sacred medicine is that we need to disrupt any story that illness is means there's something wrong with you, that you are
yeah,
spiritually inferior,
yeah,
or you are psychologically damaged, or you are not trying hard enough, or
yeah.
it's your fault, or, it's one of the paradoxes of healing that I put in sacred medicine is that your illness is not your fault and your healing journey is your responsibility.
Yes, same here. That's so what I believe. And all we do is we show up and we try to make our body the best healing environment it can be. And
Absolutely.
that's our only job as I see it. And we also take the medicine if we need it, and help ourselves find that relief in the moment. And
Absolutely.
it's
The other,
I love that message.
yeah, thank you. The other thing you brought up was like, not everybody can go to India. Not everybody
Nope.
can go work with the shamans in Peru and the Qigong masters from China and the Balinese healers. And I kind of felt like I was pretty uncomfortable in a way with this whole journey because I realized it was like a measure of my extreme privilege.
Yeah.
Like, I have every privilege except I'm not a male. But basically, on the scale of privilege, I have every other privilege.
All of it. Yeah.
And so many people who are sick lack all of those privileges, and it's not fair.
Yeah.
So
It's not
my
fair.
social justice parts sort of felt like, okay, let me leverage my privilege to scour the globe, to
Yeah.
try to find what's out there, to bring it back, to put it in a $20 book,
Yeah.
so that we can democratize some of this and figure out if there's anything that we can make cheap and affordable and do it yourself. And then I'm working my ass off right now for my nonprofit Heal At Last, where we just got our first $100,000 grant to figure out, okay,
Wow.
because one of the paradoxes of healing is you can heal yourself and you can't do it alone.
Yeah. And you need money to do it.
And you need money to, well, I'm sort of playing Robin Hood now. I'm like taking money from the Carnegies to like, give
Yes.
it to the people that, because so many people with wealth have huge social justice parts and recognize that they on their own healing journeys have have spent a fortune
Yeah.
on being able to get the best outcome possible. And healing should never be a luxury good. So we're
No.
working really hard to try to take some of these tools and put them into group healing models, sort of akin to 12-step programs, where, it used to
Hmm.
be that recovery from addiction was a luxury good. You had to be able to afford to go to the Betty Ford Center and
Yeah.
pay cash. And, thank God places like 12-step, democratized that. And basically
Yeah.
it's by donation only. You can find it anywhere on the planet. You're in groups of people getting peer support, and everybody gets
Yes.
a sponsor and a sponsee and a group of healing and community. And but not everybody, not every trauma survivor identifies as being an addict or somebody in a relationship with an addict.
Of course.
So we're sort of looking for, like, where do we put those people whose trauma symptom is illness?
So
Like,
important.
like anybody who identifies as being in recovery from illness, injury, or trauma, we're trying to take some of these sacred medicine tools and create like our own 12-step program of, like, here's how to actually use the healing tools together in community, cheap. So
That's amazing. That's
but
amazing. And
it's
yes, and a journey of
possible.
its own, right?
Yeah, totally.
So I feel like every time I write a book, I learn something from that book. Is there anything that you learned writing this book that you didn't expect, that you were like, wow, sometimes I feel like we write these books, right, for everybody else, but also we end up going like, oh, I kind of wrote the book I needed. Was there anything that surprised you or that you learned that you didn't expect?
Well, it was really not on my radar to, I knew that, I mean, the data is really clear. I knew trauma causes disease. That is like open and shut case. The data is extremely
Yeah.
clear. It's very mainstream. You can watch Nadine Burke Harris on her TED Med talk about adverse childhood experiences and the link to adult
Mhm.
onset disease and decreased longevity. And that's all open and shut case. But what I had not thought about was that treating trauma might reverse disease.
Mhm.
And we
Yep.
still don't have good science for that. We have some early
Yep.
pilot studies that are promising, but we
Yep.
don't have a lot of proof that treating trauma can cure cancer, for example. We don't have any proof
Right.
that that's the case. We only have anecdotes. And in the world of evidence-based medicine, that's not proof.
Yeah.
But that's exciting to me, that
So much.
that was the piece of the conversation that was missing when I was researching mind over medicine. Like, nobody was out there talking about reversing illness by treating trauma. So lots of people were already out there talking about mind body medicine and psychoneuroimmunology and
Yeah.
nutrition and exercise and meditation and all of that. But nobody that I was aware of was talking about that piece. So that felt like the holy grail of what was missing. Not that the other things aren't equally important,
Right.
not like the one and only thing. It's all, I'm not going to make that the one size
Yeah.
that's now the
Hmm.
panacea.
Yeah.
That felt like the missing piece. And then on
Right.
a personal level, I was sort of laughing earlier, like, why did I write this book? And I realized that, and I've been training doctors for 9 years now in the Whole Health Medicine Institute. And so I think it's not just me, it's almost every doctor I've ever met that, why did I go to medical school in the first place? And I think
Hmm.
a lot of my own trauma work has been around power and control. And
Mm.
almost every doctor was overpowered in childhood and had some young part that decided, never again am I going to be the least powerful person in the room. Like, none of us became
Wow.
nurses for a reason. Like,
Interesting.
we literally wanted to control life and death. Like, that's
Mm.
how godlike we wanted to be in our power. And
Yep.
it's very, very disheartening when you go to medical school and you realize I can't control life and death. So
Mm.
some part of me was like, well, if I go on this journey, maybe I
Yes.
can finally, like, hack healing and control life and death. And then I have to laugh at the hubris of that, like the arrogance of thinking
Right.
that I could ever decode the mystery.
Right.
I'll
We're all so funny and we don't
give
even know
myself
it.
a hug to those
Yes,
little
you have
parts,
to love yourself anyway.
right?
Yes,
The
yes.
little power hungry parts.
Yes. Oh, I love it. I love it. And what do you want people to take? What message do you want people to take away from this book the most? Like, what's the most important thing? Somebody reads this beautiful book with the most beautiful cover and they close it. what do you want them to hold in their heart when they are done with this book?
Oh, I really want them feel to feel love
Mm,
for themselves, for their wounds, for their suffering, for other people that are wounded and suffering. Like I said at Lourdes, I found it so touching. My mother had just died when I was at, or had just died when I was at Lourdes, and even just like lighting a candle on those altars where everybody
mm,
else was lighting candles for people they had lost. There's something I think so touching about recognizing that we're not alone in our suffering,
yeah.
that it is the human experience. We don't have to suffer alone, and it's not our fault that we suffer.
Yeah.
We suffer less when we can feel that, when we can feel our humanity and
Yeah.
feel that we're connected to humanity and feel that there are billions of other people on the planet suffering just like we are, and we don't have to suffer alone. So
Yeah.
I really hoped that when somebody closes the book, they feel less alone, they feel more compassionate for their own wounded parts, and that they're able to extend that compassion to other people who are also wounded.
I love it. And I got that so much from the book. I mean, growing up, my dad was a therapist and used to always say, suffering is not bad, suffering alone is bad. And we feel so alone, especially when we feel like our bodies are broken. And and I think your book really does drive home that we aren't alone, and also really so deeply that it's not our fault, that it's our responsibility to do what we can
Yeah,
to support our healing, to be miracle prone, to however you want to say it, but it's not our fault and we're not broken if we're sick. And
no,
I it's so important because that in and of itself is traumatizing to believe
absolutely.
that. And if trauma has an impact on the physical body, how can we heal when we're blaming ourselves for being sick? It's totally contradictory.
Absolutely. And my teacher, Rachel Naomi Remen, has been my spiritual teacher for 15 years. She's an 84-year-old doctor who's been sick since she was a teenager.
Mm,
And she wrote a wonderful book called Kitchen Table Wisdom, if any of your listeners haven't read it. And I remember her telling me a story about one of her patients. She did sort of end of life care for people with a terminal diagnosis or people who had lost something they would never get back, like their limbs.
mm,
And I remember her telling me a story about one of her clients who was in severe pain and was going to the emergency room. And she went and she told Rachel, like, I drove myself to the ER. And Rachel was like, why didn't you call somebody to drive you to the ER? And she said, because what are they going to do? They're not going to be able to make my pain better. And she
mm,
said, you don't call them so they can ease your pain. You call them so that you can ease your loneliness.
mm. Oh,
Right? Like
so important.
we don't have to be in pain alone.
No.
But for a lot of people who are suffering, like that's their work, is like they hate asking for what they need. They hate asking for help.
Yes.
They hate feeling needy or vulnerable or dependent. And I know I hate it. The book
Yeah.
begins with a story of my own healing journey that was unexpected. I didn't anticipate having to be the guinea pig of everything that was in sacred medicine. I won't
Yeah.
have the spoiler alert on that, but I think that's really what I want people to feel coming out of it.
Yeah. And I love the work you're doing with the nonprofit because that's what that is. A lot of people don't know where to find people. I mean, I think that's also a privilege if you have I'm from California, and finding community who are open about healing and about loving ourselves more. That was easy. That was easy for me. That was where I grew up, but that's not true in every area. Not everybody
No,
can speak about chronic illness and invisible illness. And so I love the work you're doing to make this central place where it's okay to be experiencing that and to find community in that. So thank you so much for all you're doing.
well, and there are places around the world where it's absolutely taboo to be
Yes.
having these conversations. So I just wanted to like normalize this. This is
Yeah.
normal. This is the normal human experience.
Yep.
None of us are going to be immortal, and all of us are going to get sick at some point.
Yep.
Like, let's be kind to each other, please. And I got so angry during the pandemic with just the wellness industry and the sort of mind body world. I had
I'm with you.
to cut three
Yeah.
whole chapters from sacred medicine from people that just went off the absolute conspiracy theory
Yeah.
end and were
So
just like
many.
cruel. These are
Yeah.
healers? Like what? They were being absolutely cruel. And
What?
basically in this really arrogant place of like, my body is so strong, my spiritual practice is so strong, my immune system is so strong, I don't need to wear a mask or
Right.
be locked down or get vaccinated. And I'm like, bullshit, that's bullshit.
Right. Right. And I think I shared with you personally, and I won't give details, but my energy medicine teacher who I trained with died of COVID because they had that exact same perspective that if they just took supplements and they were strong enough. And it is, I mean, for me, I really think that believing you're invincible is a product of trauma. It's a defense
Absolutely.
mechanism because it's scary. If we think something is real and it can get us, it's scary. It triggers all of our parts that feel like we're out of control. And I think that it makes sense why the wellness industry went totally insane. I can't, I mean, I know we share the same views
Yeah.
on this, but
Been a
that
great
I think
ally. And I was so happy, during the pandemic, there's all these healers that are kind of like, are you still okay? Like, have you gone on
yes,
the weekend? Are we still allies? So it
because
was
you've so
great.
been the voice and it's been so important, and I've sent so many of my own students and readers to your Facebook page, and you just so beautifully bring everybody together on the topic. And I think it's so important to see, I think when we're traumatized sometimes by the medical, our medical experiences, we go then to, and this happened to me for sure, then we only want natural healers and energy medicine. And then after you're there a while, if you look really carefully, you see, wait a second, they don't have all the answers either. Not only that, I think a lot of people go into healing because of their own trauma. So then we have traumatized people who haven't healed emotionally helping other people heal. And that can be really dangerous. And hopefully, eventually, we come back to the middle, which is eventually where I ended up, which is like, wait, we can just take the best of both worlds and we can integrate it and we can all appreciate that we need it all. And we don't always know what works and what's best. And I love that your book, I love that Sacred Medicine doesn't proclaim to know everything. That comforted me so much
Oh,
that many of the people you interviewed were like, I know this, and this, but I still don't know this, and this. And if they still don't know, we don't have to know as individuals why we're not healing fast enough.
right.
Or, it takes the pressure off. And I
Well, I
love
think
it.
that I don't know was part of my discernment criteria. Like I loved interviewing. I spent years working with Bill Bankston, and
Yes,
he's hilarious. He's like this penultimate scientist,
I
hands-on healer,
love
curing
him.
cancer in mice. He's hilarious. And I remember, I was like, okay, so tell me about where does he calls it hocus pocus. Where does hocus
Yes.
pocus work? And where are your failures? And he's like, Lord knows, I have no explanation for why it seems to work for like stage 4 pancreatic cancer and Alzheimer's, and it doesn't do shit for warts or Parkinson's.
Right.
That's useful information. Like,
So useful.
right? We don't know why, but that's interesting. And
It's so interesting. I loved that specific part. I
yeah,
know I'm familiar with his work and
yeah,
love him,
he's
but
great. He's
also
hilarious.
so honest.
Totally.
So honest.
And one of the questions that I asked every healer was, do you have a story to explain why innocent people suffer tragically?
Mm,
And I just wrote a blog about this like the day before yesterday where I was like, I wasn't satisfied. Like one trauma therapist said, Lissa, I have no freaking idea.
mm,
And that was honestly the only answer that
yeah.
felt okay to me. Like
Yeah.
other people were like, well, they're expiating their karma for past misdeeds and
Right. Right.
or their soul signed up for this and this is, their curriculum in earth school
Yeah.
or like there's a whole everybody had like a pat answer.
Yeah.
But when you actually start unpacking those things, especially when I started talking to marginalized and oppressed populations, like,
Yeah.
hey, mother of Black son who just got murdered from the cops, do you think your soul signed up for
Yeah.
this
Of course.
journey so that you could become enlightened and come back in a more enlightened form? And do you think your son signed up to get killed by a cop so that he could pay for past misdeeds from bad karma in the past? And they look at me like, are you
Right.
fucking crazy? Can you just give me a hug? Right?
Right.
Like
Right.
it was such cruel messaging when you in any way overlay it
Mm,
on anybody else. Like I know a lot of people, myself included, have benefited from trying to make meaning from their suffering. using some of those belief systems for myself.
Yeah.
The minute we go into, let me try to explain your suffering metaphysically or spiritually, it's like, I don't even think that's helpful. I think it can be quite cruel.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I love this book so much. You did a brilliant job. I'm so honored to be able to help spread the word about it. I'm going to keep talking about it, and I so appreciate your time today. I know you have lots going on, so thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Amy, so much. And to anybody who's listening who might
It's been
still be suffering, just sending lots of love. You're not alone.
Thanks, Lissa.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.